How can we avoid ambiguity in our prompts? I posed this question to Bard and ChatGPT. Let's see first what Bard had to say. So first, be specific, and it gives an example. Instead of writing, saying write a poem about love, it says write a poem about the first time you fell in love. That's more specific. Second advice is to use examples. So rather than saying write a story about a detective, you could say write a story about a detective like Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot, or give another name of a detective. Thirdly, use key words. So again, be more specific. And then fourthly, be clear about your expectations. Instead of just saying, write a poem about the first time you fell in love, you could say that you want it to be at least 100 words long and have a rhyming scheme. And it gives some additional tips. So I pressed Bard a little bit further and asked it to define ambiguity, and it had a very useful response, illustrating two main types of ambiguity. So first, lexical ambiguity. For example, the word bank. Bank can refer to a financial institution or to the side of a river. That's lexical ambiguity. Bank can refer to two different things. And then secondly, syntactic ambiguity. Syntactic ambiguity. So in the sentence, the man saw the woman with the telescope, this can mean that the man saw the woman who was using the telescope. All right, so the woman is standing there using a telescope and the man saw her, or that the man saw the woman while looking through his telescope. Syntactic ambiguity. Then it gives some more tips for avoiding ambiguity. And again, this common theme that we keep coming up to, provide context. So let's go back to these first ones though. Use specific language. Avoid using words that have multiple meanings, or provide some adjectives, right? That could define like what type of bank you mean, right? Or provide an additional explanation that defines it. I'm talking about a bank, meaning the financial institution. And then use clear and concise sentences. Well, we have another video about that. All right, I concluded my conversation with Bard on this topic by asking about some people who are experts on reducing ambiguity. And it referred to Strunk and White in their guide, The Elements of Style. Something called Garner's Modern American Usage. I've never seen that before. And the Chicago Manual of Style, which are really giving the same kind of advice over and over again. And finally, I asked a question, trying to put these into practice, because really I have a hunch as someone who has a degree in ancient Latin and Greek, that there are some ancient authors who can be very helpful in teaching us how to reduce ambiguity. So I realized that my question was perhaps overly vague, because I was hoping that Bard was going to say, well, you should, Socrates and Aristotle. So I took Bard's advice and I asked, what are the names of some ancient philosophers who were well known for teaching people how to avoid ambiguity? And by asking a more specific question, I was able to get the response that Socrates and his Socratic method is relevant to avoiding ambiguity. Plato and Aristotle. All right, now let's go see what ChatGPT had to say. It suggests 7 strategies for minimizing ambiguity. So be clear and specific. So for example, instead of saying, what can you tell me about dogs? Ask, what are some common health issues in golden retrievers? That's a much more specific question. Secondly, use complete sentences. So a complete sentence has what? A subject and a verb. So don't just type dogs, right? Tell me about, so tell is a verb. And then you have a clause which explains what? Tell me about the different breeds of dogs. That is a complete sentence. Thirdly, provide context. So instead of asking who is the president, ask who is the current president of the United States. Or you could say, who was the president of the United States in 1985? Right? Use explicit language. Now this is interesting because this gets into the realm of parameters, which has come up at least once before, where you're basically instructing ChatGPT to give answer the question in a certain type of way. So this is telling us that we can instruct ChatGPT to provide factual information and avoid personal opinions. And then, so there's lots of different ways that could be done, but that relates to the topic of persona and the fact that you can instruct ChatGPT to take on a certain persona. I'm not sure whether you can do that with Bard. Fifthly, break down complex questions. So don't ask all of your questions in the same prompt. 6, introduce relevant constraints. I guess this is a different way of number 3, providing context. And then review and refine your prompt. So read the prompt, ask yourself, is there anything ambiguous, and then revise it to make it less ambiguous. All right, I asked ChatGPT about ambiguity. I found that this response was not as helpful as what Bard said. Then I asked, what are the names of some people who are well known for teaching people how to reduce ambiguity in their writing? And it listed several individuals, Joseph M. Williams, George Orwell, Steven Pinker, Brian A. Garner, and Lynn Truss. And then I asked about ancient philosophers, and it said Aristotle, which is interesting that it referred to his work on rhetoric. I'm still learning about Aristotle, but I also know that Aristotle had a bunch of writings on reasoning, and it seems to me that reasoning is more fundamental than rhetoric. So rather than jump straight to rhetoric, we might want to look at his works on reasoning. But nevertheless, Aristotle would be someone good to look at. Plato, Confucius, that's interesting. I confess I know very little about Confucius, so I don't know if this is a good response or not, although what ChatGPT said about Aristotle makes me think that this needs to be taken with a grain of salt. And then Socrates, and then Marcus Tullius Cicero, which that's pretty cool. I think that I'm interested in investigating that more. And then ChatGPT gives a nice caveat here. Avoiding ambiguity was not their sole specialty, but their writings on these different topics, for example, rhetoric or oratory, touch on the topic of clarity and minimizing ambiguity.